I'm from Bangalore. I was a colleague of both Suresh KK, whom you just heard, and Satish. This was at a newspaper called Midday in Bombay. I'm from Surat. I'm going to speak about a subject that I have been thinking about quite a lot because I've been working with it. I was a journalist for a fairly long time, and in the last decade or so, I have been working in activism. The definition of journalist is somebody of journalism. Journalism, we should understand, is linked to journal, that you need to have a magazine or a newspaper for it to be journalism in the traditional sense. That what does a journal do? A journal captures and reproduces news. That's the classic definition. Activism is direct action. You do something to bring about change. If we are not served lunch at a particular point, you should start shouting and make sure that I get off the stage so that we can eat. That is activism. Tweeting that this person is speaking for too long, not leaving, that would be journalism. Is there a distinction? I think the question to my mind would produce the answer no. Let's look at it in three ways. One is the theoretical framework, one is the legal framework, one is the ethical framework, and it will not be as boring as I'm making it out to be. The theoretical framework I already explained to you, which is that a journal is an organ that goes out, captures and reproduces news. How does this happen? It happens because people like Suresh KK or reporters, I'm the reporter with the Sessions Court beat. You bring the material in, it is sifted, it might be edited, and it is reproduced. That is news. That is what news organizations are supposed to do. Is that all that you do? No. That material is also commented on. Newspapers, as mostly of newspapers, have sections called editorial and op-ed pages, where you have commentary not related to the news, where people are offering their opinion on how things ought to be or not ought to be. This, to my mind, is not very different from activism. That if you think of journalism as being purely fact, that I will only communicate fact, that there are this many number of fans on, there are so many people here, that would be classically construed as being journalism. But that is not all it does. It also offers opinion. Once the news is in, the newspaper says to its readers, we think that this is right or this is wrong. In my mind, that does separate it too much from the world of activism. The second is legal framework. If you read the Constitution, there is one article that all of us should be aware of, and that's Article 19. All the freedoms that Indians have in terms of expression are in that one Article 19 space. What are those freedoms? The first one is the freedom of expression. The fact that I can speak here, that Satish can organize this, that you guys can come here and listen to people, is part of that freedom of expression. We are not like China. It's not possible in China to have a gathering of people such as this, where you talk about the government, or you might be listening to somebody here to speak a critique of the government. It's not possible in many other countries. It is still possible in India. But Article 19 also has other freedoms. And these are all fundamental rights. One is the right to peaceful assembly. The government cannot stop people who want to gather peacefully, such as this gathering. Does the government stop such gatherings? Yes. And I'll speak about that in a bit. The third is the right to association. All these three are part of Article 19. If there is one part of the Constitution you should really read and keep with you, it's Article 19. It's only 5 lines. But these three rights, the right to free expression, the right to peaceful assembly, and the right to form associations are at the base, are at the heart of democracy, not voting. Voting is incidental to democracy. It is the guarantee that the Constitution gives us for expression that ensures that states remain democratic, not the right to vote. You could have the right to vote where you have somebody in office, you don't have any. If we look at these three as being one right, the right to freely express ourselves, whether in peaceful assembly, in free speech, whether in forming associations, then journalism is no different from activism. It's the same thing. We might recoil idea that journalists want some things to happen or want some things to be stopped, but that is no different from journalism itself. The last part of this is the ethical framework, and I think that this will make many journalists uncomfortable. The idea that a reporter or a photographer or a cartoonist would not only offer comment but seek to change something materially in the outside world. That already happens. If you look at the hierarchy of journalism, there is a certain element of freedom that some journalists get which others don't. For instance, I think a cartoonist is the one journalist with the highest degree of freedom in terms of commentary. She can say things and draw things that are not possible to communicate with this directness, either definitely not by reporters, not by photographers, not by editors either. And I think that this is what defines, that's why newspapers have cartoonists, that they are able to bring in that element of subjectivity, which for the most part journalists don't want to have in their work. We don't want to be seen as subjective output workers. We want to be seen as people who only deal with objective material. The photographer also, because a photograph is a comment, the angle from which it's shot, the time at which it's shot, the composition, communicates things that words cannot. And it is a commentary. These three things, broadly speaking, are what would constitute the difference between journalism and activism. To my mind, the line is very fine. To my mind, it should be crossed. Let's turn to the question of why should it be crossed? Why should journalists not just report or photograph things or capture them in a cartoon, but also act on them? And how can they do that? The question of why is quite simple. When I was your age, I'll be 53 next month. When I was your age, the constitution was the same, but some of the laws were different. So after 2018, in 7 states, including this state, interfaith marriage is banned. That if it is banned, that if you have somebody from one community wanting to marry somebody from another community, you have to fill out a form, apply to the government, 30 days notice. The government will determine whether the marriage can go through. Second problem with this law. If a woman says she married and converted of free volition, she's an adult woman, one of you, you are all more than 18 years old. If one of you tells the government, I've converted of free volition, independently, it's my mind, government does not accept that as being evidence. It is the person you're marrying and the family she's marrying that have to convince the government they did not brainwash you. The word is coercion. Adult woman's testimony is not acceptable. 2018 law, 7 states, including this one. Some of this was built into the constitution earlier. Much of it is new. What is early, very briefly I can tell you. When the constitution was being written, the Christians of India went to the assembly and they made a representation saying it's an article of our faith that Christianity requires us to spread the word of Christ. It is part of our religion. That we tell people that Jesus had come, he was the Son of God. If you believe in him, you go to heaven. That is part of the faith. There was a man called Frank Anthony who ran schools in this part of the world, Karnataka, Bangalore as well, who made that representation. he was an Anglo-Indian. They can't actually convert because they are racially Anglo-Indian, half European and half Indian. But on behalf of the Christians, he said, can you give us this right? That right was given to them, Article 25. What does it say? All of us have the right to freely practice and propagate the faith. The word propagate was debated, and it was concluded that it meant to convert. That was taken away from them in the 70s. So today, we have the strange situation in India where the right to propagate, where freedom of religion is both a criminal offense and a fundamental right. If you have a pastor, we read the news all the time, much more in recent times, of people at gatherings like this where they're talking about their faith, the police comes in and takes the speakers away. So we are criminalizing what is basically a fundamental right. Within that, you've got the marriage laws that I spoke about. Karnataka passed theirs this year. In 2015, BJP states began to pass laws which criminalized the possession of beef. So what does that mean? In some states of India, eating beef and slaughtering it is legal. In some states, slaughter is not legal, but eating is legal, Goa. In the Northeast, all of it is legal. What BJP states began to do, the first ones were Maharashtra and Haryana in 2015, was that they reversed the burden of proof. Our law, basically India, Pakistan and Bangladesh have the same laws. If you go to Karachi, I've been to Pakistan many times, if you go to Karachi or Lahore or Dhaka or Peshawar and say 420, 302, 144, they know what those numbers mean. Because it's the same law. In the 1860s, a man called Macaulay began to write the Indian Penal Code. It's still basically the operative law in this country, and in Pakistan, and in Dhaka. It is based on something called common law, where the fundamental premise is you are innocent until proven guilty. If I'm found with a knife in my hand from which blood is dripping, there's a dead body next to me which has been stabbed, it's for the police to prove that I did the murder. Reversal of burden of proof in beef means that if I am accused of having beef in my fridge or in my van and the police make the accusation, it is for me to prove that that meat is not beef. If I can't prove it, it's jail. What happened? And you can Google this. This is an Indian Express story. In 2019, this Gujarati man, Muslim obviously, was accused of serving beef at his daughter's wedding. The police filed the case, couldn't prove that this was true. The judge sentenced him to 10 years in jail, saying, we can't prove it, you have to prove that the meat that was consumed all those weeks ago was beef or not beef. The High Court later reversed that, but the law remains. Reversal of burden of proof, exactly like the marriage law. It's not for the woman who is, the state is saying the woman has been converted forcibly. Her testimony doesn't count. The burden of proof shifts to the people that the state wants to go after. In Assam, what began a few years ago when the CA, you guys are old enough to remember what happened in late 2019. What does the law say? The law says that there will be contractors on 2-year contracts. These are either lawyers or they are retired government servants. They will assess the documents of people who have been anonymously accused. Without revealing my name, I will say that that person is a Bangladeshi or has come from somewhere, please go after him. My name is not in the paperwork. The police go and pick that woman up. She has to prove that her ancestors were there before the 1971 war. What is the proof? You have to show electoral roll documents. You have to show birth certificates of your grandfather. The spellings all have to be consistent. People were rejected because the name of the father or the mother or the grandfather or the grandmother was different, slightly different on one document than it was from another. It happens to me it happens to me. The spelling of my name, spelling of my father's name, Anil, is wrong. It differs between my voting card, my last passport, and my light bill. Many of us have this sort of problem, but it's not possible to have a law which, given this, we've got the police here. I'll go back to that thing that I said about Article 19. This is a fundamental right. The fact that we can gather here peacefully is a fundamental right. What is a fundamental right? A right that the state cannot encroach on. We have a very high degree of freedom, but that right actually doesn't exist. You have the right to file an application to the local police station. Can I have a gathering here? Can I call these people here? The police have the right to say yes, no, or maybe. Protest in public is part of democracy anywhere in the world. If you look at news channels, you'll see people outside corporate offices, government offices holding up, placards in small groups of 4, 5, and 6. We don't want this, down with that. You can't do that in India. You have to go to his office and fill out a form saying, can we protest against McDonald's or against, Cartoonu Habba or whatever. That's the way it works. It is a criminalization of the fundamental right. On the citizenship issue, what happens is, once it's determined that you failed that test, families are separated. Men are put away in a different jail, women are kept in a different jail. Children till the age of 6 are kept with the women. At the age of 6, they are let go of the jail and sent out into the community. We don't know who takes care of them after that. This is the reason why such large protests across the country when this bill was passed. But most of us might not know about this. To my mind, when you have such laws, and these are all recent laws, they did not exist when I was your age. When I was your age, we were just as poor a country as we are today. We were just as desperate a country as we are today. But we did not have this element of nastiness coming down from the state that we have today. It makes me worried for the next couple of decades. But I'm encouraged also by the fact that you people have many more tools to express yourselves than we did 30 years ago. Social media gives you a voice to be able to engage with the laws, to be able to engage with democracy and the world in a way that was not possible. And I think it's a wonderful thing. It does have its negatives, but I think overall, on the whole, it gives you more power than the most powerful people on earth had 50 years ago. It gives you the ability of reach. You can really go out and speak to people. If you have the quality of content, you can actually become not maybe a journalist in the sense of somebody who goes to an office and works for a newspaper or a channel, but a journalist in the sense that you can report and comment on what's happening. You can be both a journalist and an activist. And that's very few things that you can or cannot comment on in a way that was impossible to do 50 years ago. And I think you should use this power. Forget the distinction between journalists and activists. Make sure that you record and observe. Make sure that the times that you leave behind 30, 40 years from now are better than the ones we left for you. I'll close with some data on the economy. That when I left Surat and came to Bombay, it was generally positive. This was just a short time after what is called liberalization, which is that part in our economic history when the government decided to step back and the private sector would do most of the work. You will have heard stories from your parents or your grandparents about waiting for a phone line or waiting for a scooter and so on. What has happened is that Bangladesh in per capita GDP has gone ahead of India in 2020. The average Bangladeshi person has more money than the average Indian. First time in history. Why? they have done well, and that's good. I think we should feel well for them. We have slipped. One reason we have slipped is the number of women working. India has amongst the lowest labor force participation rates for women in the world. It's close to Somalia's, lower than Bangladesh, lower than Pakistan. Women, including graduates, work in the labor force at a low level in this country than in most of the world. I'll give you some numbers. In China and Vietnam, labor force participation rate of both men and women is over 70%. In the US, it's just north of 60%. In India, it's 39%. For women, it's about 10%. There are no jobs for all the voluminous hordes that are coming out of our 28 states. While the narrative in our media is focused on single stories, some murder, some communal conflict somewhere. We need to be able to pull ourselves out of this, and one way of doing that is not to assume that our role in democracy begins or ends with the vote, but to use, as Akash said, those 5 years in the middle to make sure that our voices are. Thank you very much for listening to me. I'll be very happy to take any questions you have. I have a few books. You can just download on a website called libgen.rs. If what I said interests you in the least, you can go and pirate them for free.
Any questions?
Thank you. It's funny you say that because I have actually pirated one of your
Well done.
books. It's a book that you translated, Why I Write, the stories of Saadat Hassan Manto, by whom I've been deeply influenced. And I would want to know from you how times have changed since then, and how do we keep the spirit of Manto alive?
That's, well, that's a very big question. So Manto, for those of you who don't know, was this scriptwriter in Bollywood, in Bombay. He's a Kashmiri person who comes from Amritsar and works in Bombay in the 40s. He's friends with Ashok Kumar and so on. And he writes some scripts, most of which are failures, but he writes very good short stories, fantastic ones. He also wrote some non-fiction, and I was able to translate that a few years ago. I wish we had somebody like him to document where we are today. I think that the ability of us to look on what is going on without doing it through the lens of our own community, that I am a Hindu, I am a Patidar, I will only look at. He had that ability to escape that, and I wish more of us had it. Unfortunately, I don't think we do, which is why we are where we are. But that book, in case you want to read it, is sort of available for free. It's on this site, Libgen. Thanks.
Thank you so much, sir.
Hi, sir. In the recent Press Freedom Index, India slided down to 150th rank. What could be the major reason you think India has been already down?
The major reason is the fact that Kashmir is operated on a different law than the rest of India. So there is a new media policy 2020. For those of you who are sort of interested in journalism, read that document. It basically says that the journalist in Kashmir is treated differently than the journalists in the rest of India, and there is a law called UAPA, which I'm sure you've heard about, is used quite liberally on the media there. They can't really report. When the world sees this, they demote us. We should not see the world as our enemy. We want to be a part of the Security Council. We want to be seen as a first world country, which is fine. We should then listen to what the world is saying about how we are treating our own people.
Another question I have. Okay. So, as we supposed to have our decadal census in 2021, why it's still getting late? Because of CNRC?
First time in 120 years that India has not had a census. In the first year of every decade, as he knows, since 1880, we've been having a census where the government goes around and takes stock of the number of people. It doesn't ask you whether you're a citizen or whatever else. The problem is, and I'm sure he knows the answer as well because it's a very good question, we have muddied the water so much over the last 3 years on the issue of citizenship that enumerators, who are basically just teachers from a government school who are given 5 days off and they go to homes and they start making lists. They are too scared. People don't want to be going through what the state of Assam did. I don't know when it will happen. They are saying that it might happen next year.
They are planning for 2023 in digital way, I guess.
Who knows? Well, digital is just where you record it. The fact is that I still have to go to the house to see who is there. If they are thinking of doing it entirely on the phone, it's not possible. Large parts of India don't have phones. Large parts of India change their numbers every 2-3 months because they get a better deal from, Jio or whatever.
All right, thank you, sir.
Any other?
Well, thank you very much. I want to end by just thanking all of you for coming, but also congratulating Cartoonu Habba. There are very few institutions in this country that we are not, for some reason, we don't have the ability to have things that are replicable and that we can mount and that can attract this kind of audience and have this element of success. And for doing it for 9 years, we should all be really grateful to Satish and what this team has done. Thank you very much.